History often tells us of great kings and noble leaders, of brave warriors and visionaries whose names echo across the ages. But for every tale of triumph, there are darker stories, whispered and half forgotten. Stories of men and women whose cruelty left scars deeper than any monument, whose deeds were so chilling that time itself seemed eager to bury their memory. These figures do not appear in children's textbooks or polite conversations. Yet in the hidden corners of history, they wait, reminders of the shadows that follow power and the cruelty that humanity is capable of. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's somewhat comforting to imagine all of us scattered across the globe, quietly unwinding together. So, breathe deeply, settle in, and allow the mysteries of time and space to cradle your imagination. For in the quiet hours of the night, under the same stars watched by our ancestors, the secrets of long-lost civilizations and long-forgotten figures await, patiently, quietly, like ancient stars still shining from light years away. Let's begin. Imagine, for a moment, the golden light of the Sicilian sun falling across rolling hills. Olive groves shimmer in the breeze, and the Mediterranean air carries with it the faint scent of salt and earth. The city of Akragas rises in the distance, its temples gleaming on the ridge, a testament to devotion and prosperity. Life here in the 6th century, before the Common Era, seems idyllic, touched by beauty and blessed by fertile soil. But as with so many places in history, beneath the splendor lies a darker truth, hidden in the chambers of power. For here ruled a man whose name became a byword for cruelty, a tyrant remembered not for wisdom or justice, but for the invention of one of the most chilling instruments of suffering, Phalaris of Akragas. Phalaris came to power in the Greek colony of Akragas, now Agrigento, during a time when Sicily was a land of contested wealth and rivalries. Accounts of how he rose are as murky as the shadows he would later cast. Some say he seized control through cunning and treachery, manipulating his way into office with promises of stability and prosperity. Others claim he was entrusted with responsibility only to betray that trust, turning a free city into a place ruled by fear. However he achieved it, what followed was a reign so brutal that his name was remembered in whispers long after his fall. The most infamous tale associated with Phalaris is the story of the brazen bull. According to ancient writers, an Athenian craftsman named Perilos presented the tyrant with a new form of execution, a terrible machine of artistry and cruelty combined. It was a hollow bull, cast entirely in bronze, large enough to contain a human being within its belly. A door was set into its side, and once closed, it could be heated from beneath with fire until the metal glowed, and the occupant inside was roasted alive. Pipes and channels in the bull's head were designed so that the screams of the victim emerged, not as cries of agony, but as the sound of a bellowing animal, echoing like music across the square. To its maker, it was a grim marvel. To Phalaris, it was the perfect symbol of power. The stories say that when Perilos demonstrated his invention to the tyrant, Phalaris was delighted, but cruelty often devours itself, and in an ironic twist, Phalaris is said to have tested the invention on its very creator. Perilos, who had thought to impress his ruler, found himself locked inside the bull, his cries the first to ring out as proof of the machine's design. The tale is both chilling and strangely poetic, for it shows how cruelty, once unleashed, rarely spares even those who shape it. Phalaris's reign was marked not only by the bull, but by relentless oppression. He taxed his people harshly, seized land and wealth, and punished dissent with ruthless efficiency. Ancient sources describe him as a man who cloaked tyranny in grandeur, commissioning temples and monuments while keeping the population subdued by fear. His city shone with splendor, but its streets were haunted by whispers of those who vanished behind palace doors. It is said that Akragas grew powerful under his rule, yet its beauty was tainted by the suffering upon which it was built. And yet, history often weaves complexity even into the darkest figures. Some later accounts suggest that Phalaris was not entirely without merit. Certain writings portray him as a capable ruler who defended his city from outside threats and fostered prosperity through order and discipline. These stories, though, feel like faint echoes compared to the weight of his cruelty. Whether such claims are attempts to balance his legacy, or whether they reveal that even the harshest tyrants sometimes brought stability, is difficult to say. What remains is the chilling legend of a man who transformed punishment into spectacle, and whose name became synonymous with torture. In time, Phalaris's tyranny met its end. Accounts differ, as history so often does, but many tell of rebellion rising against him. His cruelty had sowed resentment, and eventually his enemies gathered enough strength to overthrow him. Some say he was executed in the very brazen bull he had commissioned, a poetic justice that history relishes repeating, even if it is more legend than fact. Whether or not he truly met such a fate, the image of the tyrant consumed by his own cruelty has endured for centuries. It is a reminder that power built upon fear is fragile, and that darkness, no matter how deep, can collapse upon itself. As we let the story of Phalaris settle in our minds, imagine the city of Akragas once more. The sun sets behind its temples, casting long shadows across the valley. The olive trees stand silent, the air still. In the distance, the waves of the Mediterranean crash softly against the shore. Time has long since swept away the tyrant and his bull, leaving only ruins and whispers. What remains are the stones of temples, golden against the sky, and the quiet memory of a ruler whose cruelty once echoed through their halls. It is a strange comfort to know that while fear once reigned here, today only silence does. Close your eyes and let the image fade. A city of light and shadow, a man both feared and despised, and a tale that lingers not in the monuments of stone, but in the darker corners of human memory. From Akragas, we drift forward, across centuries and continents, to another figure, another story, another reminder that evil is not always found in the famous names of history, but also in those whispered at the edges of time. Picture a quiet morning in the Southern Song dynasty. Mist curls over the mountains, the bamboo groves whisper softly in the breeze, and the surface of West Lake glimmers like polished jade under the pale light of dawn. Poets of the time would write of such beauty, of tranquility and balance, of a civilization flourishing with art, calligraphy, and the measured rhythms of courtly life. Yet even in such moments of elegance, shadows moved in the halls of power. Among them was Qin Hui, a chancellor whose name would come to symbolize betrayal, deceit, and the extinguishing of honor. To understand Qin Hui's infamy, one must first know of the hero he is forever bound to, Yue Fei. Yue Fei was a general, celebrated for his loyalty and courage, who defended the Song dynasty against the invading Yurqian armies of the Jin. He was a figure of unwavering devotion, a man whose very back bore tattooed words said to read, "Serve the country with utmost loyalty." His victories brought hope to the dynasty. His dedication inspired soldiers and civilians alike. To the people, Yue Fei was not simply a commander. He was the embodiment of righteousness, and yet it was this very light that drew the envy and fear of others. Qin Hui, a chancellor within the imperial court, saw in Yue Fei not only a general, but a threat to his own influence. History remembers him as a man skilled not in valor or leadership, but in intrigue. While Yue Fei fought on the battlefield, Qin Hui maneuvered in the shadows of the palace, whispering poison into the ears of the emperor. He argued for peace with the Jin, even at the cost of surrendering land and dignity, and viewed Yue Fei's defiance of these policies as dangerous. To Qin Hui, peace was not a matter of protecting lives, but of protecting power. His power. The betrayal unfolded with chilling swiftness. Yue Fei was summoned back from the front. His campaigns halted. His army dispersed. Upon his return to the capital, he was arrested under false charges. The accusations were vague, built upon fabricated evidence and rumors, yet the emperor, swayed by Qin Hui's words, allowed the trial to proceed. The phrase recorded in the annals was chilling. Yue Fei was condemned on the grounds of no need to look for evidence. These words became infamous, a cruel reminder of how justice can be twisted when power is at stake. Yue Fei was executed in prison in the year 1142. His life ended not at the hands of enemy soldiers on the battlefield, but by the hand of betrayal within his own court. His death broke the hearts of the people, for they had seen in him a rare kind of loyalty, a beacon of integrity in a turbulent time. To them, the true villain was not the invader at the gates, but the traitor within the palace. Qin Hui became that traitor, his name forever cursed by the people. In the centuries that followed, Yue Fei's legacy only grew brighter. He was enshrined as a national hero, a symbol of loyalty and patriotism. Shrines were built in his honor, his deeds recited in poems and operas, his tomb a place of reverence. And standing before his tomb, cast in bronze, were statues of Qin Hui and his wife, kneeling in chains. For generation after generation, visitors spat upon these statues, a ritual of scorn and contempt that kept the memory of betrayal alive. The figures remain there even today, silent and bowed, as if history itself wished to keep Qin Hui forever humbled at the feet of the man he destroyed. What makes Qin Hui's story so chilling is not the spectacle of bloodshed or the grand scale of conquest, but the quiet cruelty of betrayal. Unlike tyrants who ruled with armies and iron fists, Qin Hui's power was subtle, rooted in whispers and manipulation. His evil was not thunderous, but insidious. He represents the darker truth that sometimes the greatest dangers come not from the battlefield, but from within, the dagger not thrust by the enemy, but by one's own companion. And yet, like so many figures we explore tonight, Qin Hui was not without defenders. Some argued he sought peace to spare the dynasty further suffering, that his choices were pragmatic in a time of overwhelming pressure. But history, with the clarity of hindsight, judged him harshly. His peace with the Jin brought no lasting security. His betrayal of Yue Fei brought no honor. What endured was the memory of a man who traded loyalty for ambition, righteousness for influence, and left behind a legacy of scorn. As the mists of time drift around him, one can imagine Qin Hui standing in the quiet corridors of the imperial palace. The silk of his robes rustles as he bows before the throne, his words smooth, his expression unreadable. Outside, the city of Lin'an breathes with life, the sound of merchants at market, the laughter of children, the gentle splash of oars across West Lake. But within those walls, decisions are made that will echo for centuries. And somewhere in a dark prison cell, a loyal general waits, betrayed by the hand of a fellow countryman. Let the image soften now. The bamboo groves return. The mist rises once more over still waters. The betrayal fades into silence, and only the calm of the landscape remains. History has judged Qin Hui, binding him forever to the memory of Yue Fei. And as we drift onward, we leave behind the echoes of his whispers in the court and journey into the cold forests of the Carpathian Mountains, where another figure waits, one whose cruelty would give birth to legends of monsters in the night. The night air is crisp in the forests of the Carpathian Mountains. Pines sway in the wind, their branches whispering secrets to the moon, and a chill drifts down from the high peaks where snow clings stubbornly even in spring. It is a land of castles perched upon crags, rivers winding like silver threads through valleys, and villages where candlelight glimmers faintly in the windows. In this landscape of beauty and shadow lived a ruler whose name would one day inspire tales of monsters. Vlad III of Wallachia, remembered by history as Vlad the Impaler, and remembered by legend as the inspiration for Count Dracula. Vlad was born into turbulence in the year 1431, in a world where kingdoms rose and fell to the rhythm of war. Wallachia, the land he would one day rule, was caught between two great powers, the Kingdom of Hungary to the west, and the expanding Ottoman Empire to the east. His father, Vlad II Dracul, belonged to the Order of the Dragon, a knightly order sworn to defend Christendom from the Ottomans. From this dragon, Vlad took his name, Dracula, the son of the dragon, but from his life he would take a darker legacy, one not of dragons, but of terror. As a boy, Vlad was taken as a hostage by the Ottoman sultans, a common practice meant to ensure loyalty from rival rulers. He spent years in foreign courts, learning the ways of both friend and foe, exposed to intrigue, betrayal, and the ever-present reality of violence. When he returned to Wallachia, it was as a man hardened by displacement and distrust, shaped by the knowledge that power was fragile and that survival often demanded cruelty. His reign was defined by brutality. Vlad's chosen method of punishment, impalement, was not new, but he wielded it with such scale and ferocity that it became inseparable from his name. He would order sharpened stakes planted in the ground, their points cruelly angled. Victims were raised upon them, their bodies left to writhe in agony for hours, sometimes days, as death came slowly. The forests around his stronghold were said to have been filled with such stakes, creating a nightmarish landscape that chilled both enemies and subjects alike. To ride into Wallachia was at times to ride into a forest of the dead. The most infamous tale tells of how Vlad once faced a vast Ottoman army, said to number in the tens of thousands. Rather than fight them in open battle, he employed fear as his weapon. When the invaders marched into his land, they found a valley filled with 20,000 impaled corpses, soldiers, prisoners, even civilians, arrayed in grotesque order. The sight was so horrifying that the army faltered, their spirits broken by the sheer spectacle of suffering. Vlad had turned cruelty into a form of defense, a shield more powerful than swords, and yet, as with so many figures shrouded in shadow, his story is not without complexity. To some, Vlad was a tyrant of unimaginable cruelty. To others, he was a ruler who defended his land against impossible odds, who stood firm against the expansion of the Ottoman Empire when others bent or fell. In Romanian folklore, he is sometimes remembered not as a monster but as a stern, even just leader who punished corruption and upheld order. The same iron fist that struck fear into enemies also crushed the greed of local boyars, who had long exploited the common people. To the peasant farmer, Vlad could be both saviour and nightmare. But history's memory tends to cling to extremes, and it is the cruelty that lingers. Travellers' accounts spread tales of his deeds across Europe, where the printing press carried the name of Dracula far and wide. Pamphlets depicted him dining among impaled bodies, his cruelty painted in lurid detail. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories ensured that his reputation would long outlive him, feeding both horror and fascination. In the centuries that followed, his legend would merge with myth. Bram Stoker, writing in the late 19th century, drew upon fragments of history when creating his immortal vampire, Count Dracula. Though the connection between Vlad and the fictional count is tenuous at best, the shadow of the impaler gave the novel a dark anchor in reality. Thus, the man who once ruled Wallachia through fear became, in time, the figure who would haunt literature and cinema as an eternal predator of the night. Vlad's end came, as it often does for tyrants, in blood. Accounts differ, but most agree that he was killed in battle in 1476. His head was sent to Constantinople, displayed as a trophy to prove the death of a man who had terrified so many. His body, it is said, was buried in a monastery, though the exact resting place remains uncertain. Even in death, his story lingers in mystery, as if the earth itself could not quite hold him. Now, as we leave his tale, picture once more the forests of Wallachia. The pines stand tall, their trunks dark against the pale moonlight. The wind rustles through the branches, carrying a chill across the land. Villages sleep quietly, their homes warm against the night, but somewhere, in the distance, the shadow of a ruined fortress looms upon the hills. The fires have long since gone out, the stakes have long since rotted away, and only the silence of centuries remains. Yet the name of Vlad the Impaler drifts through time, a reminder of how terror can shape history, and how legends are born not only from greatness, but from fear. Let the mountains fade now, their peaks dissolving into mist. From the dark forests of Wallachia, our journey carries us westward, into the stone cathedrals of Spain, where candlelight flickers against walls of shadow and another figure waits, a man who cloaked cruelty and faith, and whose name would forever be tied to the Inquisition. The year is 1483, and across the Iberian Peninsula, the air hums with change. The Reconquista is nearly complete, the great effort by Christian kingdoms to reclaim the land from centuries of Muslim rule. Spain is alive with the sound of church bells, the bustle of markets, and the flickering glow of candlelight spilling from cathedrals. Yet beneath the beauty of Gothic arches and the fervent prayers of the faithful, another current runs darker and more dangerous. Fear whispers through narrow streets, secrets are carried in hurried steps, and suspicion lingers in every household. It is here, in this atmosphere of devotion and dread, that Tomás de Torquemada rose to prominence, his name forever tied to the shadow of the Spanish Inquisition. Torquemada was a Dominican friar, a man of strict faith and unyielding conviction. To his contemporaries, he appeared pious and austere, living simply, devoting himself to prayer and religious duty. But when the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, sought to consolidate their power and unify their kingdom under the banner of Catholicism, Torquemada became their instrument. He was appointed as the first Grand Inquisitor of Spain, a position that gave him extraordinary power over matters of belief, conscience, and life itself. The Inquisition was not new to Europe, but under Torquemada it became a force of unprecedented intensity in Spain. Its purpose was declared noble: to safeguard the purity of the faith, to root out heresy, to protect the souls of the people. Yet in practice, it became a machinery of fear. Those suspected of straying from orthodoxy, whether Jews who had converted to Christianity, but were accused of secretly maintaining their old traditions, Muslims who resisted assimilation, or Christians accused of heretical thought, were brought before the tribunal. Interrogations were harsh, confessions were prized, but confessions often demanded suffering. Under Torquemada, torture was sanctioned as a means to extract the truth. Victims might be stretched upon the rack, their joints wrenched apart, suspended by ropes until shoulders dislocated, or forced to endure suffocating water poured relentlessly into their mouths. These methods were justified as instruments of salvation, meant to cleanse the soul through the breaking of the body. In the eyes of Torquemada and his peers, suffering here on earth was preferable to eternal damnation. Public spectacles followed. Those convicted of heresy were paraded in the auto da fe, or act of faith, dressed in penitential garments, their heads bowed as sermons thundered from pulpits. Some were sentenced to imprisonment or penance, others to death. Fires blazed in the squares of Spanish cities, consuming men and women whose only crime was a different way of worship, a private belief whispered behind closed doors, or the misfortune of being denounced by a neighbor. The flames illuminated not only the faces of the condemned, but also the fearful eyes of the crowds who gathered, knowing that a careless word might one day place them among the accused. Torquemada's zeal was relentless. He advised Ferdinand and Isabella on the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, an edict that forced hundreds of thousands to flee, abandoning homes, businesses, and the roots of centuries. Entire communities were uprooted, their histories scattered across the Mediterranean world. For those who remained unconverted, suspicion followed them still, as the Inquisition continued to pry into lives and test the sincerity of their faith. Torquemada saw this as purification. History remembers it as persecution. What made Torquemada so chilling was not that he was cruel for cruelty's sake, but that he cloaked cruelty in righteousness. He believed himself a guardian of the soul, a servant of God's will, convinced that in punishing heresy he was saving lives for eternity. This certainty made him unyielding, immune to doubt, and deaf to the cries of his victims. Unlike tyrants who reveled in power or bloodshed, Torquemada's terror lay in his conviction that he was doing good, and yet, as with so many figures in history, his story is not without paradox. Under his authority, Spain grew more unified, its monarch strengthened, its influence on the world stage expanded. But this unity came at a cost of diversity, of tolerance, of countless lives lost or shattered. The Spain that would send Columbus across the ocean in 1492, beginning an age of exploration and empire, was forged in part by the fires of the Inquisition. Torquemada's shadow stretches far beyond the tribunal chambers where he once sat. When Torquemada died in 1498, he left behind a legacy both feared and reviled. For some in his time, he was a man of iron devotion who had safeguarded the faith. For countless others, he was the architect of suffering, a man who turned belief into a weapon and righteousness into fear. His name became synonymous with cruelty, invoked in later centuries whenever tyranny disguised itself as piety. Now, as we leave his tale, imagine standing in a Spanish cathedral at dusk. The stone arches rise high above, and the last rays of sunlight filter through stained glass, painting the floor in shifting colours of ruby and gold. The air smells of incense, and the murmur of prayer drifts upward into the stillness. Outside, the square is quiet, its fires long extinguished, its secrets carried away by the wind. What remains is silence, and the memory of a man whose certainty left scars upon a nation. Let the cathedral fade now, the bells tolling softly in the distance. From the heart of Spain, our journey drifts eastward to the rugged hills of Hungary, where a great castle loomed over the countryside, and where rumours tell of a countess whose thirst for cruelty was matched only by her legend. The hills of Hungary lie quiet beneath a winter sky. Snow drapes the countryside in a soft white veil, and the great forests stand hushed, their branches heavy with frost. Rising above the stillness is a castle, its walls stark against the pale horizon, its towers catching the last faint glow of dusk. From within those walls, fires burn, casting their light across stone corridors and echoing chambers. It is in this setting that one of Europe's most infamous legends was born, the story of Elizabeth Bathory, a noblewoman whose cruelty has been whispered about for centuries, her name entwined with shadows, blood, and myth. Elizabeth was born in 1560 into one of Hungary's most powerful families. The Bathorys were wealthy, influential, and connected to both kings and princes across Europe. From the beginning, her life was one of privilege, surrounded by tutors, servants, and the trappings of nobility. She married young to Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a soldier often away at war. Left to manage vast estates, she wielded power over hundreds of peasants and servants, her authority unquestioned, her will absolute. It is within this power that the darker parts of her story took shape. Rumours began to circulate of strange punishments within the castle, of servants disappearing, of cruelty that went far beyond discipline. The legends grew darker still, tales of girls lured into her service, only to suffer unspeakable fates. Some stories claimed she tortured them with needles, others that she beat them until the walls were stained with blood. The most enduring legend of all was that she bathed in their blood, believing it would preserve her youth and beauty. Whether true or exaggerated, the tales painted her as a figure of chilling obsession, blending vanity with sadism. The number of victims attributed to Elizabeth is staggering. Some accounts claimed she was responsible for the deaths of dozens, others for hundreds, and still others for more than 600 girls. The truth is lost in the haze of accusation, but even the lowest estimates suggest a pattern of cruelty on a scale that defies comprehension. The stories captured the imagination of her time, turning her into a figure both feared and sensationalized. What makes Elizabeth Bathory's story so haunting is not only the cruelty itself, but the setting in which it occurred. A grand castle, its windows glowing with firelight against the snow, became the stage for horror. Behind those stone walls, beneath tapestries and carved beams, acts of suffering were said to unfold, hidden from the outside world, yet whispered about in villages below. In a land already marked by war and hardship, the thought that such cruelty came not from invaders, but from one's own noble rulers, was a terror in itself. Yet, as with so many figures in history, the truth may be more complex than the legend. Elizabeth lived in a time when powerful women were often viewed with suspicion, and enemies within court may have sought to destroy her reputation. Some historians argue that the charges against her were exaggerated, perhaps even fabricated, as part of a scheme to seize her vast wealth and estates. The myth of bathing in blood, for instance, appears to have been added later, feeding into Gothic imaginings rather than reliable testimony. It is possible that she was guilty of cruelty toward her servants, as many nobles were, but that her story grew into monstrous proportions through rumour, politics, and the human fascination with tales of evil. Regardless of the exact truth, Elizabeth's fate was sealed. In 1610, King Matthias II ordered an investigation into the accusations. Witnesses came forward, their testimonies painting a grim picture of suffering within the castle. Soldiers raided the estate, and Elizabeth was accused of murder and torture. Unlike most accused criminals, however, she was never put on trial in a public court. As a woman of noble birth, she was spared execution, but she was condemned nonetheless. She was walled up in a small room of her castle, its windows bricked over, its door sealed. There she remained until her death in 1614, isolated in darkness, a prisoner of her own legacy. Her story has lingered in folklore and imagination ever since. Some remember her as the Blood Countess, a woman whose cruelty seemed inhuman. Others see her as a victim of conspiracy, a powerful woman destroyed by those who envied her wealth and influence. The truth may lie somewhere between legend and fact, forever obscured by the mists of time. But the fascination endures, for her tale touches on themes that haunt us still: the abuse of power, the thin line between history and myth, and the way that cruelty, whether real or exaggerated, becomes immortal in story. Now, as we step away from her tale, imagine the castle once more. The fires have gone out, the snow continues to fall, and silence fills the halls where whispers once stirred. The stones stand cold, the rooms empty, the legacy of cruelty reduced to legend. Outside, the forests stretch endlessly into the night, their branches swaying softly, as if brushing away the memory of what once occurred within those walls. Let the image fade and drift with me onward. From the cold halls of Hungary, our journey carries us across the vast plains of Russia, where winter deepens, bells toll in icy air, and a Tsar waits whose name became a title of terror, Ivan, called the Terrible. The Russian winter stretches endlessly across the land, a vast expanse of white fields and frozen rivers. The wind whistles through birch trees, carrying with it the sound of distant bells from onion-domed churches, their golden spires gleaming faintly against the pale sky. In this quiet, the land seems eternal, timeless, serene. Yet in the 16th century, within the high walls of Moscow's Kremlin, there reigned a man whose name would become a warning, a story told in hushed tones. Ivan IV, remembered as Ivan the Terrible. Ivan was born in 1530, heir to the Rurikid dynasty that had ruled Russia for centuries. Orphaned young, he grew up in the turbulent corridors of court, where boyars, Russia's powerful nobles, jockeyed for influence and treated the young prince with cruelty and neglect. He witnessed violence and betrayal at an age when most children are still sheltered, and in this crucible of fear and suspicion, his character was forged. By the time he was crowned as the first Tsar of all Russia in 1547, he carried within him both the brilliance of a visionary ruler and the seeds of a deep destructive paranoia. In the early years of his reign, Ivan showed promise. He reformed government, codified laws, and expanded Russia's territory with successful campaigns. He founded new institutions, strengthened central authority, and sought to modernize the state. To many, it seemed as though he might become a great ruler, one who could bring order to a land often fractured by internal strife. But beneath this surface lay a mind restless, tormented, and increasingly consumed by suspicion. The turning point came with the death of his beloved wife, Anastasia, in 1560. Ivan adored her deeply, and when she died suddenly, he was convinced she had been poisoned by the boyars. Whether true or not, the loss unmoored him. His grief turned to fury, his suspicion to obsession. He lashed out at the nobility, convinced of their treachery, and set in motion a reign of terror that would scar Russia for generations. He established the Oprichnina, a separate domain within Russia ruled directly by him, enforced by a corps of loyal guards known as the Oprichniki. Dressed in black, raiding black horses, and carrying the severed heads of dogs as symbols of vigilance, they became instruments of terror. They descended upon towns and villages, seizing land, executing those accused of disloyalty, and spreading fear wherever they went. Entire communities were destroyed, their people slaughtered or driven into exile, their homes burned. To Ivan, this was justice. To the people, it was devastation. The most infamous of his atrocities was the massacre of Novgorod in 1570. Convinced that the city's leaders were plotting treason, Ivan unleashed his wrath upon them. For weeks, the Oprichniki carried out executions, drowning men, women, and children in the icy river, torturing others, and leaving the streets littered with the dead. Thousands perished, and a city once proud and prosperous was left broken, its survivors scarred by memory. Yet, as with so many rulers of cruelty, Ivan was not a simple figure. Alongside his violence, he expanded Russia's territory into Siberia and the East, paving the way for the vast empire it would one day become. He strengthened autocracy, ensuring that the Tsar's word was supreme. To some, he was a necessary force, uniting and centralizing a land long divided. To others, he was a tyrant whose madness cost countless lives. His reign became a paradox, builder and destroyer, visionary and despot, a ruler remembered for both achievement and atrocity. Perhaps the most haunting story of Ivan's life came in 1581, when in a fit of rage, he struck his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich. The blow, delivered with his scepter, killed the young man, leaving the Tsar distraught, cradling his dying son in his arms. A painting by Ilya Repin, created centuries later, captures the moment, an image of horror and despair, the tyrant undone by his own hand. With that act, Ivan not only destroyed his heir, but also cast his dynasty into uncertainty. When Ivan died in 1584, he left behind a Russia larger and more centralized, but also scarred by violence and instability. His death marked the beginning of a period of chaos known as the Time of Troubles, when famine, war, and dynastic struggle plagued the land. His name, Grozny in Russian, is often translated as the Terrible, but it also means the formidable, the awe-inspiring. In this lies the complexity of his legacy, a ruler both feared and remembered, monstrous yet monumental. Now, as his story fades, picture once more the vast Russian landscape. The snow drifts quietly across the fields, the rivers lie frozen in silence, and the bells of a distant monastery toll slowly through the air. The cruelty of Ivan the Terrible is gone, carried into memory, but the land endures, patient and eternal. What remains is the reminder that power, when consumed by fear and suspicion, can turn even vision into terror. Let the cold winds of Russia fade now and drift with me southward, where the air grows warmer, where the scent of spices lingers in the breeze, and where another ruler waits. In the palaces of Mysore, amid war elephants and battlefields, a sultan rose who was hailed as a patriot by some and feared as a tyrant by others. Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore. The air is warm in southern India, heavy with the scent of sandalwood and jasmine. Palm trees sway in the humid breeze, and the sun sinks slowly over the plains of Mysore, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, the walls of a great palace rise, adorned with intricate carvings and domes that shimmer under fading light. The city hums with life, merchants calling out in bazaars, children chasing one another through dusty streets, the trumpeting of elephants echoing from royal stables. Yet beneath this vibrant landscape, shadows stir, for here, in the late 18th century, ruled Tipu Sultan, remembered as the Tiger of Mysore. To some, he was a hero who resisted colonial domination. To others, he was a tyrant whose cruelty left deep scars. His story, like so many, lies between admiration and fear. Tipu Sultan was born in 1751, the son of Hyder Ali, who rose from soldier to sultan through skill and ambition. From childhood, Tipu was trained in warfare, learning not only the art of sword and spear, but also the strategies of modern battle. When his father died, Tipu inherited a kingdom that was both rich and contested. Mysore was a jewel of southern India, but it lay within the expanding interests of the British East India Company and their allies. Tipu would spend much of his life in conflict with them, determined to preserve his sovereignty and resist foreign encroachment. In this struggle, Tipu gained fame. He modernized his army, introducing new weapons and adopting European techniques, while blending them with Indian traditions. He used rockets in warfare, devices that inspired both fear and awe on the battlefield. His defiance made him a symbol of resistance, a ruler who refused to bow before colonial powers. To this day, some in India remember him as one of the first great fighters against British imperialism, a patriot who stood his ground when others yielded. But history's gaze is not only upon his battles with foreign powers. Within his kingdom, darker stories emerged. Tipu Sultan's rule was marked by accounts of forced conversions, particularly among Hindus and Christians living under his reign. Entire communities were pressured to abandon their faith, temples and churches destroyed or repurposed. Resistance met with harsh punishment. Thousands were said to have been marched away from their homes, their identities stripped as part of a policy of control through religion. For those who suffered, Tipu's name carried fear as heavy as the weight of his sword. Prisoners of war, too, bore the mark of his cruelty. Captured soldiers and civilians were sometimes executed in brutal fashion, or carried off into forced service. His campaigns, though fought with courage, often left devastation in their wake. Fields burned, villages emptied, survivors scattered. The tiger, his chosen symbol, represented both his courage and his ferocity. It was emblazoned on banners, coins, and even mechanical toys, such as the famous Tipu's tiger, a carved automaton depicting a tiger mauling a British soldier. To his supporters, it was a proud emblem of defiance. To his enemies, it was a chilling boast of cruelty. And yet, Tipu Sultan was not without vision. He supported trade, encouraged craftsmanship, and introduced reforms to strengthen his state. He cultivated diplomatic ties with France and other powers, seeking allies against the British. He promoted silk weaving and sought to modernize agriculture. His palace at Srirangapatna reflected not only grandeur, but also an openness to innovation. He was not a mere brute, but a complex figure, strategist, reformer, devout Muslim, and fierce warrior. The contradictions of Tipu Sultan lie at the heart of his story. To some, he is remembered as a national hero, a martyr of anti-colonial resistance, standing tall against the tide of empire. To others, he is remembered as a persecutor, a ruler who crushed those who opposed his faith or authority. The truth, as often in history, lies somewhere between. He was both visionary and tyrant, both liberator and oppressor. His cruelty cannot be denied, nor can his courage. His end came in 1799, during the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War. Surrounded in his fortress at Srirangapatna, he fought with the ferocity that had defined his life. When the walls were breached, he refused to flee, choosing instead to die with sword in hand. His body was found near a gateway of the fort, his blood soaking into the earth of the kingdom he had fought so fiercely to defend. To his enemies, it was the end of a dangerous adversary. To his followers, it was the death of a tiger, unbroken to the last. As we leave his story, picture once more the land of Mysore. The sun has set now, and the night air hums with the sound of crickets and the distant beat of a drum. The palaces lie in shadow, the domes catching the glow of moonlight. The people sleep in their homes, while the memory of their sultan lingers in the air, part hero, part tyrant, part legend. The tiger no longer prowls these lands, but his name echoes still, carried in both pride and pain. Let the warm winds of Mysore fade, and drift with me north and west, across seas and continents, to the deep forests of Central Africa. There, under the heavy canopy of jungle, another ruler rose. He wore no armor, commanded no rockets, and fought no battles of patriotism. Instead, he ruled from afar, his cruelty disguised as civilization, his greed cloaked as progress. His name was Leopold II of Belgium, and his domain was the Congo. The Congo River winds like a silver serpent through the dense heart of Africa. Its waters churn and crash over rocks, then spread wide and slow under the heavy green canopy of the jungle. Birds call from unseen branches, drums echo faintly from villages hidden in the trees, and the humid air clings to the skin like a second layer. It is a land of great richness, of ivory, of rubber, of forests alive with life. But in the 19th century, it became something else. It became a kingdom without mercy, ruled from thousands of miles away by a man who never walked its soil, but whose shadow fell over every tree, every village, and every life. His name was Leopold II of Belgium, and his private empire, the Congo Free State, became one of the most infamous theatres of cruelty in modern history. Leopold was not, at first glance, the figure of a tyrant. Born in 1835, he became King of the Belgians in 1865, inheriting a small nation hemmed in by larger powers. Belgium had no great empire, no colonies stretching across oceans, no sway in the contests of the age. But Leopold dreamed of more. He envied Britain and France, Spain and Portugal, and longed to carve his own place upon the world's stage. The Congo, vast and little understood by Europeans, became his chosen prize. Through diplomacy and deception, Leopold secured control over the region at the Berlin Conference of 1884-85, presenting himself as a philanthropist, a man motivated by the noble cause of ending the slave trade and bringing civilization to Africa. The territory was declared the Congo Free State, not belonging to Belgium, but to Leopold personally as his private possession. To the world, it was painted as a grand humanitarian mission. In reality, it was a system of brutal exploitation. At the heart of Leopold's empire was rubber. As demand for rubber soared with the rise of industry, the forests of the Congo became fields of profit. Villagers were forced into labor, compelled to collect sap from rubber vines deep in the jungle. Quotas were imposed, impossible demands enforced. Failure was not tolerated. Soldiers of the Force Publique, the colonial army, enforced Leopold's rule with rifles and whips. Villagers who didn't meet their quotas were beaten, mutilated, or killed. Entire communities were taken hostage to ensure compliance, wives and children held, while men toiled in the forests. The most haunting symbol of this cruelty was the severed hand. Soldiers were required to account for their bullets, to prove they had not wasted them in hunting or rebellion. Each bullet used had to be justified with a right-hand cut from the body of the dead. Villages filled with the sight of hands severed from the living as well as the dead, hands piled as proof of obedience, hands that became the currency of terror. The scale of suffering was immense. Estimates suggest that during Leopold's rule, from 1885 to 1908, millions perished, whether through violence, starvation, disease, or despair. Entire regions were depopulated, their villages burned, their people scattered or gone. The jungle grew back over abandoned clearings, erasing the traces of life that once thrived there. The Congo became a place where silence spoke louder than words, where the absence of voices told the story of cruelty. And yet, for many years, the world did not see. Leopold maintained his image as a benevolent monarch, funding public works in Belgium, supporting charities, and speaking eloquently of civilization and progress. In Europe, statues were raised in his honor. In Africa, his name became a shadow that carried fear. It was only through the courage of missionaries, travelers, and campaigners such as E.D. Morel and Roger Casement that the truth began to emerge. Photographs of mutilated children, reports of villages destroyed, testimonies of survivors. These revealed the hidden empire of suffering. The outcry grew slowly at first, then louder, until the weight of truth could no longer be ignored. Under pressure, Leopold was forced in 1908 to hand over control of the Congo to the Belgian state. Even then, the exploitation did not entirely end, but his personal reign of terror was broken. By then, the damage had been done. Millions of lives had been extinguished, cultures disrupted, memories scarred. The Congo had been transformed into a place of trauma, its forests echoing with absence. Leopold himself never faced justice. He died in 1909, leaving behind a fortune built upon blood and rubber, a Belgium beautified with the wealth of suffering. To many in his own land, he was honored as a great builder, a patron of architecture and the arts. But to those who knew the truth, he was one of the most ruthless figures of modern times, a man who cloaked greed in philanthropy and cruelty in progress. Today, the legacy of Leopold still stirs debate. Statues of him stand in Belgian cities, some toppled or defaced in protest, reminders that the past does not easily fade. In the Congo, the memory of his rule lingers in oral histories, in wounds passed from generation to generation. His story reminds us of how easily noble words can disguise terrible deeds, and how suffering can be hidden behind the facade of civilization. Now, as we step back from the shadows of the Congo, picture the forest once more. The sun has set, and moonlight filters through the canopy, glistening on leaves wet with rain. The river flows on, indifferent to history, carrying with it the songs of unseen birds and the rustle of unseen creatures. The cries of the past are gone, replaced by silence, but the memory remains, drifting like mist through the trees. Let the jungle fade now, and drift with me onward. From Africa, we cross to the Ottoman Empire, to the deserts and mountains of Anatolia, where the sun beats down upon caravans moving in silence, and where another man waits. A pasha whose name became bound to one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. The Anatolian sun hangs heavy over a wide, open plain. Dust swirls in the heat, and the mountains in the distance shimmer like a mirage. Caravans of travellers move slowly along winding paths, their footsteps leaving faint traces on the earth. The silence of the land seems timeless, eternal. Yet, in the early years of the 20th century, this same silence was broken by cries of anguish, the shuffle of forced marches, and the shadows of soldiers watching from horseback. At the centre of this suffering stood a man whose ambition and decisions left scars that still echo today, Enver Pasha, one of the leaders of the Ottoman Empire during its final turbulent years. Enver was born in 1881, a young officer who rose quickly through the ranks. Handsome, charismatic, and fiercely ambitious, he became a central figure in the Committee of Union and Progress, the political movement that came to dominate Ottoman politics in the years before the First World War. In 1913, through a coup, he and his allies seized power, ushering in a new era. Enver was appointed Minister of War, a position that gave him immense influence at a time when the empire stood at the crossroads of history. When the First World War began in 1914, Enver saw it as an opportunity. He believed that by siding with Germany, the Ottoman Empire could reclaim lost territories and restore its fading power. But ambition often blinds judgment. His decision led the empire into a war it was ill-prepared to fight, a war that drained its strength and hastened its decline. On the battlefield, Enver's leadership proved disastrous. His winter campaign against Russia in 1914-15, known as the Battle of Sarikamish, ended in catastrophe. Ill-equipped, underfed, and exposed to the bitter cold of the Caucasus Mountains, tens of thousands of Ottoman soldiers perished, their bodies frozen in the snow. The defeat haunted him, but worse was yet to come, for it was under Enver Pasha's leadership, alongside Talat and Shemal, that the Armenian genocide unfolded. In 1915, amid fear of disloyalty and rebellion, the Ottoman government ordered the deportation of its Armenian population. Officially, it was presented as a security measure. In reality, it became one of the darkest tragedies of the modern age. Men were executed, intellectuals and leaders targeted first. Women, children, and the elderly were forced into long marches through the desert, deprived of food and water, subjected to violence and abuse along the way. Villages were emptied, communities uprooted, lives extinguished by hunger, thirst, and brutality. Enver's exact role has long been debated, but as Minister of War and one of the most powerful men in the empire, he was deeply implicated. His orders, his authority, his policies enabled the systematic destruction of the Armenian people. By the time the war ended, an ancient community, one that had lived in Anatolia for centuries, had been devastated. Estimates vary, but as many as 1.5 million Armenians perished. To the world outside, reports trickled in, accounts from missionaries, diplomats, and survivors. The word genocide had not yet been coined, but the reality was clear. A people had been targeted for destruction. Enver, however, remained defiant. Even as the empire crumbled around him, he clung to dreams of glory, insisting that history would vindicate him. When the war ended in 1918, the Ottoman Empire lay broken, and Enver fled into exile. He wandered across Europe and Asia, seeking alliances, still chasing the vision of a pan-Turkic empire stretching across Central Asia. He joined revolutionary movements, schemed and plotted, never abandoning his ambition. His final chapter came in 1922, far from Istanbul, in the deserts of modern-day Tajikistan. Leading a small force against Soviet troops, he was killed in battle, cut down not as a statesman or a general, but as a fugitive chasing a dream that never came to be. And so, Enver Pasha's story is one of brilliance twisted by ambition, of leadership consumed by cruelty, of dreams that brought ruin instead of glory. To some, he was a patriot who sought to revive his empire. To history, he remains one of the architects of tragedy, a man whose decisions left an indelible stain upon the land he loved. Now, as we let his story settle, imagine once more the Anatolian plain. The sun sinks low, the dust begins to settle, and silence returns to the earth. The caravans fade into the distance, their paths winding toward the horizon. The cries have ceased, and only the wind remains, carrying with it memories too heavy to forget. The empire he dreamed of has long since vanished, but the echoes of suffering remain, bound to his name. Let the desert fade now, the horizon softening into twilight. From Anatolia, our journey carries us eastward once more, to the rice fields of Cambodia, where the 20th century witnessed yet another nightmare. There, beneath the heavy skies and the silence of abandoned villages, a man rose who sought to remake his nation through terror. His name was Pol Pot. The Cambodian countryside lies serene under a heavy sky. Rice fields stretch endlessly, their green stalks swaying in the warm breeze, while water buffalo wade slowly through the shallow pools. Palm trees rise against the horizon, their fronds rustling softly, and the air hums with the sound of cicadas. It is a landscape of peace, timeless and fertile. Yet in the 1970s, this same land bore witness to one of the most harrowing chapters of human cruelty, led by a man whose name has become a shadow across Cambodia, Pol Pot, leader of the Khmer Rouge. Born in 1925 as Saloth Sar, he grew up in a rural village, surrounded by the rhythms of farming life. Later, he studied in Paris, where he encountered radical ideas of communism and revolution. When he returned to Cambodia, he joined the growing movement against colonialism and monarchy. In time, he rose to lead the Khmer Rouge, a revolutionary group whose goal was to transform Cambodia into a self-sufficient, agrarian utopia. To Pol Pot, modern society was corruption, cities were decadence, and history was to be wiped clean. In his vision, the country would begin again from year zero. When the Khmer Rouge seized power in 1975, this vision became reality, but reality soon dissolved into nightmare. Within days, the population of Phnom Penh, Cambodia's bustling capital, was forced to march into the countryside. Families left their homes, carrying what little they could, as soldiers ordered them into labor camps. The cities were emptied, their streets silent, their buildings abandoned. Pol Pot and his followers sought to erase the old world and build a new one upon its ashes. Life under the Khmer Rouge was ruled by fear. Money, markets, religion, schools, all were abolished. Families were broken apart, individuals stripped of identity and forced into endless labor in the fields. Anyone suspected of disloyalty, of education, of foreign influence, or of being an enemy of the revolution was executed. Glasses could mark one as an intellectual, a second language as a crime. Torture became commonplace, carried out in secret prisons such as Tuol Sleng, where thousands were interrogated, photographed, and killed. The brutality was staggering. Starvation and disease swept through the countryside, as forced collectivization left crops to wither and fields mismanaged. Executions filled mass graves, their sites hidden beneath the soil. Over the span of just 4 years, nearly 2 million Cambodians, almost a quarter of the population, perished. Villages fell silent, families vanished, voices erased. What was promised as a utopia became one of the most devastating genocides of the 20th century. Pol Pot ruled not with charisma or open terror, but with cold detachment. He rarely appeared in public, his face little known even to his own people. He directed cruelty from the shadows, his words carried by cadres, his vision enforced by young soldiers indoctrinated to obey without question. His power lay not in presence, but in ideology, an ideology that justified suffering as necessary for a perfect world. In 1979, the Khmer Rouge regime collapsed. Vietnamese forces invaded Cambodia, driving Pol Pot and his followers into the jungles along the border. From there, he continued to lead a guerrilla resistance, clinging to his vision long after its horrors had been exposed. For years, he evaded capture, protected by loyalty and isolation, a ghost who haunted the nation he had destroyed. It was not until the 1990s that his power finally waned. Tried by his own followers and placed under house arrest, Pol Pot died in 1998, not in a prison cell, but in his sleep, in a remote jungle hut. His death brought no great reckoning, no moment of justice equal to his crimes. Instead, Cambodia has lived on with his memory like a shadow, its people rebuilding, its fields blooming again, but its past lingering in silence. Today, visitors to Phnom Penh walk through Tuol Sleng, its walls still lined with the photographs of prisoners who never left. In the countryside, the killing fields lie quiet, marked by stupor and bone, reminders of the millions whose voices were silenced. Now, as we let his story drift into memory, imagine once more the Cambodian landscape. The rice fields ripple softly in the wind, the sky grows dark with the setting sun, and the air is filled with the sound of crickets and frogs calling into the night. Life continues, as it always does, slowly covering the scars of the past. But beneath the soil, in memory and story, the echo of Pol Pot remains, a reminder of how ideology can blind, how cruelty can destroy, and how even the most peaceful of lands can be turned into fields of suffering. Let the fields fade now, the night settling gently across the land. From the rice paddies of Cambodia, our journey through shadows comes to an end. And so we return, gently, from the long path through history's darker corners. We have walked the streets of Akragas beneath the Sicilian sun, drifted through the mist of China's mountains, wandered in forests haunted by Vlad the Impaler, and stood in the cathedrals of Spain. We have entered castles in Hungary, braved the Russian winter, crossed the warm winds of Mysore, the jungles of the Congo, the deserts of Anatolia, and the quiet fields of Cambodia. In each place, we found figures whose cruelty shaped lives, whose names may not always be taught in school, but whose shadows remain. If you're still awake, let your thoughts fade like mist across the plain, and let rest find you softly and slowly. Or if you're still full of quiet curiosity, why not journey onward with one of our other explorations, perhaps into the mysteries of ancient civilizations, or the rise and fall of great empires. Wherever you are, thank you for listening, and until next time, sleep well.